It's all doom and gloom. Both the 24/7 news cycle and social media are constantly reminding us we live in a world filled with wars, climate disasters, fears of possible nuclear annihilation, and a potential AI takeover. This is making quite a few people panic and ask, is the world as we know it about to end? What happens if it all goes wrong? And will everyone get the same protection? I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream.
In the house. Laugh out loud.
Now, many are searching online on how to build underground bunkers, how to spot signs of nuclear contamination, all the while laughing at doomsday memes on TikTok. But if we're talking realistically, how much can we really prepare for the collapse of social order and ultimately an apocalypse? Also, is it a genuine, realistic danger, or is it just paranoia? Well, to discuss all of this, I'm joined by Lucy Easthope, an expert and advisor on emergency planning and disaster recovery. She specialises in mass fatalities and pandemics at the University of Bath, and she joins us from Shropshire in the UK. And we're also joined by Tom Doig, an author and investigative journalist, and he focuses on interdisciplinary approaches to the accelerating climate crisis. And he's joining us from Brisbane in Australia. Lucy, let me start with you. Concerns, fears about the end of the world. Is this a new thing? Is this something that has kind of gained traction on social media? Is it just a fascination, or should it be a genuine fear?
It's certainly not a new thing. And there's lots of reasons and genuine reasons for it. And certainly the climate crisis is one of those. But one of the things that I would say is you have to find a way to live alongside it, live with hope, look outwards, keep altruistic and looking out for other people. And it's really important to find a balance. And I think that's what we're losing at the moment.
You mentioned the climate crisis there. Tom, why are people seemingly more concerned these days about a potential end to human civilization, end of the world as we know it? Are there specific factors that have led to this?
Thanks, Stephanie. Look, I think climate change is an abstract idea, a scary story in the news cycle, as well as a lived reality for more and more people with the increasing incidence and severity of climate disasters. In Australia, it's bushfires, there's floods and tornadoes and hurricanes all over. And I think that's one of the more tangible signs of the climate crisis really hitting home. And so I think, while disasters have always been with us as humans, there are more of them, and they have a different meaning, they have a different resonance now because they're connected to this bigger, scarier question, which is the end of the entire world, with ecosystem collapse and with worsening disasters and a world where we are just in a constant non-stop disaster.
Well, there are different indicators for potential global crisis, and one of them is the doomsday clock. Every year, it's getting closer to midnight, quote unquote, the end of the world. But what is the doomsday clock? Let's take a look.
The time that is set on the clock is historically connected to the threat of nuclear war, but in recent years it has also included the threat of climate change. The decision as to what the time is comes from a science and security board, which is made up of 18 experts in areas related to policy and diplomacy, military history, nuclear science, and climate science. Now, they meet twice a year to discuss the state of the world and then consult with many people from diverse backgrounds before making a decision as to what time it is. The threat assessment is made on a 15-minute scale, so the time will always vary from 1:45 right up to midnight. Honestly, while the whole premise might seem like it's designed to incite fear or come across as terrifying countdown to our demise, it's actually designed to incite change, to encourage you and I to take action, to take the threats of humanity seriously.
Lucy, you were nodding there when she was talking about trying to affect change. The doomsday clock in 2025, 89 seconds to midnight. closer than ever, it says. There is a community called the preppers, isn't it? In my research for this show, these are people who are genuinely, Tom, I see you laughing, genuinely taking this seriously and preparing for the end of days. How big is this community and how are they preparing? And what should we learn from that?
So I'm an emergency planner, and I'm a sort of balanced prepper in that I'm not allied to a kind of apocalyptic end of the world idea. I'm very invested in ideas of getting communities resilient, getting citizen preparedness more equal, because traditionally it is the harder hit normally in society who are harder hit in disaster. So I'm a citizen preparedness girl, but there is a growing appetite for more extreme forms of prepping, as you saw in the memes there around things like bunkers and being ready to sort of live underground for a year. That's not what I advocate, but certainly here in the UK, we've got quite behind other countries in terms of thinking about things very necessarily like power outages. So thinking about both if you're caught in an incident overseas, if you're caught out of the house, you might need a go bag, which has things like your phone charger in it. And then, the kind of things that we have at home. What you're showing on screen is citizen preparedness supported by the state. So that's things like the use of underground bunkers. I think you're going to hear a lot more preparedness messages. And again, it's what to do with that. What we find is that preparedness is a really great way for, if you're feeling anxious about the world, to start to think about things that might help you manage certain aspects. But there's definitely a spectrum, and I'm not at that more extreme end.
Because we were mentioning that we were seeing on our screens, that was tagged Helsinki, Finland, having, I believe, one of the largest, if not the largest amount of bunkers for their citizens, which is very unusual, of course. That's not normal when it comes to other countries. But have you ever wondered what it takes to build your own underground bunker? Well, Rima Cheer explains.
The world feels a little more uncertain these days, a little less safe. And whether it's war, warning sirens, or just wanting to be prepared, more people are asking, what would it take to build a bomb shelter? Let's start underground, 1 metre down at least. It won't save you from everything, but it shields you from most things that fall from the sky. Walls, reinforced concrete, at least 30 to 40 centimetres thick. Think pressure waves, flying debris, shrapnel, a blast-resistant steel door, an air filtration system. Inside, it's bare bones. This isn't about comfort. It's about staying alive. You'll need water, about 3 litres per person per day. Food, a torch, first aid, battery-powered radio, gas masks, and a bucket for waste disposal. And if you can, always build a second way out. There's no tech, no service, just time, and the hope that you don't have to wait too long. Civilian shelters are designed to withstand standard blasts, missiles, rockets, and the pressure that follows, but not bunker busters, not nuclear fallout. For that, you need a very different kind of bunker, and to dig much deeper. And here's the thing, even when shelters do exist, they're not always open to everyone.
Well, we certainly don't want to panic everyone, that everyone now needs to think about building their own underground bunker. Tom, we were talking there, Lucy touched on it, about sort of the day-to-day preparedness. You were talking about power outage. I think that's quite interesting because recently there was around a 12-hour mass power outage across Spain and Portugal, where nothing worked. The lights were out, the phones didn't work. This is something that, in conversations with friends of mine in those areas, there was a real thought of the potential of a breakdown of the social order with something as simple as a power outage. How would you say that on a day-to-day basis we should be preparing, or at least have things at home for these kinds of eventualities? Because they can happen.
100% they can happen. And I think definitely basic short-term things like power outages for a few hours or a few days is something that we're going to probably experience more and more. And I think what Lucy's talking about in terms of basic disaster preparedness, especially thinking about it as a as a civil defense thing and a community-based thing, and having extra candles and food on hand. Like, that's sort of just common sense, and that's something that for a large chunk of the middle of the 20th century people would do, right? They'd have extra cans or extra dried rice and so forth. I think the bunker thing is hilarious to me on one level, because I think there's a real fetish about it, and I think the bunker becomes this kind of obsession, and billionaires build bunkers, and this idea you can live forever, even if the life is pretty crummy. And I think it's kind of a bit ridiculous, and a lot of this preppers I've spoken to in New Zealand and Australia will say, well, maybe you could live in the bunker, but what kind of life is that? And if there's actually serious kind of desperation and civil unrest up top, a lot of people pointed out to me that all your enemies have to do is block the ventilation shafts, and your bunker's not very good for very long. So there's all of that. But I think as well, in modern society, when we are so online and everything's so electrified, there's this increasing kind of obsession with the idea of the grid going down, with things like electromagnetic pulse attacks or just natural disasters from meteors, and this idea that modern society is so fragile and stretched so thin that it could all collapse or unravel in an instant. And that, I think that's both true and untrue. I think we saw with COVID that things are very fragile in some ways, that, you know, global supply chains are very just in time and very fragile, but also that maybe the state is a lot more resilient than a lot of people gave it credit for in other countries, and maybe people are not about to turn on their neighbours and attack them and eat them quite as quickly as the more pessimistic prepper views would have you think.
There's quite a few points there that I actually want to pick up on, but you did set up the next clip we want to play perfectly about the bunker fetish. Although we're talking about an end of our planet scenario, there is still a class divide.
This is the $300 million private members doomsday bunker being built for the world's wealthiest people. Designed to withstand everything from natural disasters to nuclear bombs, think of it as the Soho House of fallout shelters. The $20 million membership fee gets you access to, quote, AI-powered medical care, luxury dining facilities, IV therapy rooms, cold plunge centres, a massage area staffed by robots, swimming pools, a gym, a climbing wall, and, most importantly, a bowling alley. The bunker, which will be named Airy, is being built just outside Washington, D.C. by Safe, a construction company that specialises in building secured structures. So everything from panic rooms and pirate-proof areas for luxury yachts to what they describe as state-of-the-art air raid shelters. The bunker will reportedly take several years to build, but Safe claims the first Taster Experience Centre will open in 2026. So, until then, let's all take comfort in knowing that the world's multi-billionaires will be able to continue bowling while the rest of us are obliterated by nuclear war.
Well, this is not a one-off thing in my research for the show, and I was surprised because it's not really something that I have looked into, the end of the world. There's a lot of bunkers by millionaires in different countries. Some have their own bunkers already. Lucy, is this also a concern of the privileged? Because there are millions and millions of people who simply are struggling to make it through the day in order to feed their families. How would you describe it?
Oh, without a doubt. And there's a lot of research that, you know, as I've said, people suffer disproportionately in disaster if they're already suffering. Disasters hit much harder, often in poverty-stricken areas and deprived areas. It's one of the reasons I tend to not use the word natural disaster, because even weather and seismic disasters will often hit particular communities harder. I was watching a programme on the Blitz last week, and it was talking about how the rich of London sheltered in the Dorchester Hotel so that up until the second year of the Second World War, they could have afternoon tea. And certainly the pandemic has made this come alive for us in the world, to be able to show that people have very different lived experiences of this. And very similar to Tom's point, what are we fighting for? Are we literally saying that only 30, 40 people, the richest people in the world, would survive this? The idea for me, in a lot of my research is to try and understand how disaster response can be more equal. Even the preparedness messages put out by our own government here make me nervous, because they rely, for example, on people having resources. Solar powered torches and radios cost money. Dried food costs money. Many people are in precarious housing situations, and so that's always the point that I make when I'm asked to talk about how do you get more resilient. That's a really sort of meaningless position for people who are already struggling. So this is very much about a wealthy and a poor divide. And what would be lovely to see these companies doing who are pledging bunkers for the ultra rich is also to show how they would support children and other community members who traditionally are most disadvantaged in disaster.
Tom, what are the main fears for the end of days? I know we've talked about climate change, but we're also, in an age of sort of a nuclear arms race, if you will. A lot of people talk about a meteor hitting the Earth and it's the end of us all. Wars, a societal breakdown. I don't want to ask you to predict anything, but in your research and in your knowledge of the sort of, prepper community, what do people seem to be more concerned about?
Well, look, I just have to say one of the spiciest things I've heard people be worried about is Planet X, which is the supposed planet that will come hurtling through our solar system and come close enough to Earth to cause a reversal of the magnetic poles, which will then trigger massive tsunamis, earthquakes, and winds, at which point hiding in a bunker is the only safe option. So that's at the kind of like quite extreme sci-fi end of the scale. But a lot of preppers are also, I think, worried about almost anything that could lead to major civil war or social unrest, right? So like it could be a war, it could be a civil war, it could be famine, it could be some sort of breakdown of, again, the supply chains, but getting to a point where there's not enough food for too many people. And then particularly, I think preppers who live in regional or rural areas are worried about urban areas becoming very violent and unsafe. And that's a particular American fear. And I think it connects to there just being so many guns and people with guns in America. That is sometimes exported to places like the UK and Australia, where there actually aren't as many guns. And even if it got really gnarly and people got hungry, it wouldn't be civil war like an American-style movie.
Well, you touched on it earlier, Tom. Lucy, I just want to ask you that. When it comes to a situation of emergency, people are terrified, going back to many theories of the past, philosophers, that it is going to be like a state of nature, a survival of the fittest, people turning on each other. What do you think, Lucy? Do you think that's something, we see it in very different scenarios where it has happened. How challenging do you think something like that will be?
We tend not to see panic, poor behaviour, civil disruption. We tend to see amazing community cohesion. We tend to see people looking after each other. And again, I'm no longer talking in theoreticals. 5-6 years ago, I would train using the research. Now I'm training with lived experience. Globally, as Tom said already, we tended to see much more protective social factors than people had pessimistically predicted. We tend to only see panic, for example, if there's very much denial of resources, so severe famine, for example, and also if we see a lack of information or very poor information from the authorities. So we see a lot of reasons for people to look after each other. Some governments, more than others, rely on what we call nudge and behavioural insight to try and generate that protective response. And I'm quite a big critic of that. I'm a very big fan of kind of authentic community response. But I'm very hopeful that if I take everything that I've seen in my career, we would continue to see a lot of support. Where that tends to break down is when we see fatigue set in, and also when people become very aware of the disparity and the inequality, which is again illustrated by the rich and the poor approach to the bunkers.
Well, also, if we segue into the military zone, the likelihood of a nuclear weapon actually being used again is increasing. Well, that's according to Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's 2025 yearbook, and global military spending is increasing every year. That's reflecting the growing conflicts and wars in various parts of the world. Now, the report says world military expenditure rose by 37% in the past decade, and we spent $2.7 trillion last year. That's the highest amount spent since 1990. Also, NATO, the world's largest military alliance, spent more than $1.3 trillion on defense last year alone. Lucy, governments, you were talking about government preparedness, so I'm coming back to you. Listening to that, are they putting as much seriousness when it comes to preparing for a possible disaster scenario, whether it be something that's affected by climate, whether it's a power outage? Are they investing the same kind of money?
No, and there's parallels between defence and security spending and emergency planning spending, and often our worlds are very closely aligned, and we work very collaboratively. One of the things that I say in all my writing is emergency planning is a very obvious area for places to cut, because until you need it, you can't see it. Again, we saw that in the pandemic. And what I'm starting to see, for example, with the recent deployment to the Air India crash, is we're just not putting in global collaboration in the way that we have done in previous years. So I'm very concerned. Something like the tsunami in 2004, something on the scale of that, I just don't think we're ready to protect and work collaboratively. And the pandemic did surprise us, I think, in terms of we had much higher expectations of international collaboration. One thing as well, certainly we're seeing it in the UK, is an increased interest in supporting, as I said before, the civilian readiness for these kind of emergencies. You can't go into them and it be entirely a top-down response. Your local population has to be ready as well.
Well, we just saw Tom illustrate that live on our show with the power going out where you were, so you could never be well enough prepared. Tom, do you think people feel a lack of control when it comes to this kind of a scenario? And do you think people are taking it seriously enough that things can happen and we do need to be prepared, particularly when it comes to climate change? As you said, it's no longer theory. Things are happening. We can see things change in front of our eyes.
Yes, 100%. I think I'm not a psychologist, or I'm an amateur one, but I do think, having spoken to a lot of preppers in a lot of different countries, that often an acute sense of lack of personal control is combined with a hyper awareness of very kind of complicated and scary factors in the global economy or geopolitical problems or climate change. And I think prepping is a way that people try to take back control and to feel a sense of agency or autonomy, sort of thinking, if I can't fix the war in Ukraine or the genocide in Gaza, I can at least secure my own house and get a better lock and train with my family. So I think there is that kind of approach going on, and I think there are a lot of things to be mindful of. Whether or not you should be sort of scared about them or concerned about them, I think that's a personal thing.
That brings me into Lucy. This could be a moot conversation, couldn't it? If we're talking about the end of the world, you do think about the apocalypse, like the imminent end. Suddenly, you don't have time to suddenly go save yourself. I mean, is this something that we can escape? And do you want, like Tom was just alluding to, do you want to live in a bunker potentially for the rest of your life with people that you really don't like? Is this even something that we want?
I mean, I know how annoying I am where people have a lot of space with me. So I imagine I would be clubbed to death very early on in a bunker situation. I tend to avoid, when I'm working up scenarios with organizations that I work with, we tend to avoid the really depressing apocalypse. There's sort of three of us left roaming, and it's a much more what we call reasonable worst case scenario. And I really like what Tom says about taking control. I think a lot of modern life has been about relinquishing control, and taking some of that back can be quite useful. Certainly the emergency planning community, I'm a very proud emergency planner. We attract a lot of people who I think in other walks of life would be described as perhaps quite anxious, but we're not. We get to articulate and talk about our fears. It's a great area for study. So there's over 100 degree programs just in the UK that look at this area. And so one of the things that I would say is that the far end scenarios are very difficult to work with. But what I do know is that our work makes a difference for other types of scenario all the time. And there are people who will suffer, from severe events in the next few months, whose lives have been made slightly better by really good quality disaster research. much. So one thing I would say is do hold on to the idea that there is some hope, and also small changes make a difference, and that's really important here. What we will need to get better at as big disasters continue to come our way, as they always have, is having a global dialogue on what helps. So for example, I write a lot about ideas of bad help. I write a lot of ideas about hopium and toxic positivity, and I'm really looking to sort of educate us all that when these disasters happen, we are better neighbours.
We are better neighbours. It is about coming together. And again, it is not about panicking you. It's just been a fascinating discussion. Lucy and Tom, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for being part of the conversation. And I'll see you soon.